My name is Emma Collins. I'm 42 years old, and last month, I walked into my bedroom, our bedroom, and found my sister in bed with my husband. Let that sink in. I had just gotten home early from surgery, a routine appendectomy that went fine. All things considered, they released me a day ahead of schedule because I heal fast and I follow instructions. Classic me, always the one who follows the rules, who keeps the house standing, who shows up. What I wasn't prepared for was coming home to betrayal so violent it felt surgical in its precision. And before I tell you how I dismantled their little fantasy and took back everything they built on my back, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And hit that like button if you believe family doesn't mean free pass. Because this wasn't just infidelity. It was organized, calculated, and smiling at me across the dinner table for months. What they didn't know is that, while they were tangled up in lies, I was learning how to unstick myself from them. From guilt. From the kind of love that demands you bleed quietly. You want to know how I found out? It started with silence. That eerie kind of silence that presses against your skin. You don't hear it. You feel it. I stepped into the apartment, one hand on the doorknob, the other holding a small hospital-issued overnight bag. There should have been some noise, the low hum of the dishwasher. Maybe David on a Zoom call. Or even Melissa clattering around pretending to clean. But no, nothing. The place was still, not peaceful dead. The air felt watched, like someone hit pause on a crime scene. I should have called out their names, should have announced myself. But some animal part of my brain kicked in and said no, don't speak, don't alert, just listen. My hospital slippers brushed softly against the hardwood as I moved down the hallway. Even the floors felt cold, colder than usual. That was the first sign. The second was the door to our bedroom nearly shut. I always left it wide open. I liked the way the light fell across the duvet in the afternoon. It reminded me that home was safe, that I'd built something solid. That door, now almost fully closed, let out a sliver of darkness and a whisper. Not words. Just sound, breath, and then a laugh. Her laugh. Light, high-pitched, fake. Melissa's signature flirtation tick. Our mom used to call it wind chime laughter. But in that moment, it sounded like glass shattering inside my ribcage. I stood outside the door for maybe 3 seconds, long enough to hope I was wrong, long enough to imagine it was the TV, or a podcast, or anything else. But I knew, and still I opened it. I pushed the door with a hand that didn't feel like mine, and there they were, twisted in the sheets, the ones I had changed just 3 days ago. Crisp, white, 800 thread count Egyptian cotton I bought on sale after a hard quarter at work, because comfort matters when you're healing. David's face buried in the crook of Melissa's neck. Her fingers in his hair. I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't make a sound. I just stood there, and in that moment, something inside me stopped, like a switch flipped. I noticed the pile of David's work clothes slung over the armchair, Melissa's cheap Forever 21 jeans next to my nightstand, the same nightstand that held my blood pressure meds, the same corner of the bed where I used to lie and listen to him breathe, thinking we'd grow old together. I stared at them like an audience to a play I hadn't auditioned for. David looked up first. His eyes met mine, still soft from pleasure. That softness turned to terror fast. His body tensed, froze. Melissa followed the tension. She turned, eyes widening, mouth falling open. "Emma," she said, like her name coming out of my mouth might save her. But I said nothing. I wanted her to choke on the silence. I wanted him to memorize my face the way it stopped smiling, the way it turned to marble. I stood there for 10 seconds, maybe 15. Then I turned around and walked away. I heard the chaos behind me, scrambling sheets, stammered apologies, David calling my name. "Emma, wait. It's not what it looks like. The stupidity of it nearly made me laugh. I reached the door, picked up my overnight bag, opened the front door of the condo, and closed it behind me. That click, that soft latch catching. It was the sound of my old life ending. I made it to the parking lot somehow. My fingers trembled so hard. It took 3 tries to unlock the car. I sat behind the wheel, staring through the windshield at nothing, and then my body broke open. The sob came from somewhere deep, not just my chest, my bones. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and cried the way I hadn't cried since my dad died. I cried for every holiday I cooked, for every bill I paid, for every time I said, "Take your time, Melissa, and it's okay. David, I've got it." I cried for believing love was a two-way street. And when the tears dried, what was left was something cold, something sharp. Resolve. I looked in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back at me had tear-streaked cheeks, hair flattened from the hospital pillow. But her eyes? They weren't broken. They were focused. And then I noticed it, hanging from the rearview Melissa's necklace. A delicate silver chain I had bought her 2 birthdays ago. She'd forgotten it in my car. I yanked it down and dropped it into the passenger cup holder like trash. That was the last thing she'd ever leave behind. Because I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to make sure they remembered who built the house they just set fire to. And I would not be stepping out of the ashes quietly. Because the next time they saw me, I'd be holding receipts, financial, legal, emotional, and I wouldn't be asking for closure. I'd be taking back what's mine, one piece at a time. I drove aimlessly that day, through San Diego streets, like a ghost. Traffic lights blurred red to green. Storefronts flickered past, meaningless. Everything I saw was a reminder of the life I thought I had, and the cracks I hadn't wanted to admit were growing. The world looked exactly the same, but I wasn't. Somewhere near a deserted strip mall. I pulled over and sat with the engine running. My hands on the steering wheel were trembling. But what scared me more was how calm I felt. Not numb clean, like the worst had already happened. And now, I could finally see clearly. I reached over and grabbed Melissa's necklace from the cup holder. That delicate silver chain with the tiny rose charm she used to fiddle with during our wine nights. I stared at it for a long time. Then I rolled down the window and tossed it into the storm drain. Let it rot in the dark. That was the first thing I let go of. The second was the version of me who begged for love through service, who held everything together while everyone else unraveled without consequence. From here on, I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to play the victim. I was going to watch them undo themselves slowly. But to get there, I needed to understand exactly when the betrayal began. Because affairs don't happen overnight. And my sister didn't just fall into bed with my husband out of grief or loneliness. This wasn't spontaneous combustion. It was dry kindling, and I had supplied all the matches. So I began to rewind everything. 6 months ago, the phone call from Mom. I could still hear her voice. "Sweetheart, Melissa lost her job. The poor thing. She has nowhere else to go." "She can stay with me," I said, barely thinking. At the time, I was juggling a major brand launch, barely sleeping, but I said yes because that's what I do. That's what eldest daughters are trained for. Be the stable one. Be the fixer. Be the bedrock. She moved in the next week. Came with 2 suitcases, a box of incense, and a whole lot of "I'm working on myself" energy. No job, no savings. Just a vague plan to start a blog about urban healing. What she really did was sleep till 10, drain my coffee supply, and occupy my couch like a cat who paid rent and entitlement. But I didn't say anything. I told myself she was in transition. That's what family's for, right? David wasn't thrilled at first, claimed it would be an adjustment, but 2 weeks later, he was laughing at her jokes, asking her opinion on album art for his freelance clients, and suddenly getting Melissa in a way he apparently never got me. I noticed it, the glances, the lingering compliments. But I told myself I was imagining it, because how could they? How dare they? And then came the promotion. I had worked 12 years at Madison and Knox, sat through endless meetings, took the difficult clients, led campaigns that made millions in revenue. When I finally got the promotion to senior director, I was proud, truly proud of myself. We had a family dinner the following weekend. Mom and Dad flew down. I reserved a table at a waterfront restaurant, told them the news, waited for the applause. Instead, Mom cooed about how resilient Melissa was. "She's using this time to really find her creative flow," she said, sipping her wine. "She's thinking of launching a wellness podcast," David added, smiling. He touched her wrist when he said it. That moment replayed in my mind now like a movie scene, a slow-motion horror where the protagonist realizes the killer's been in the room the whole time. They laughed. They toasted her self-discovery. And I remember sitting there, blinking at my $18 glass of Chardonnay, wondering how I became invisible in a story I paid for. That night, I lay awake next to David. I stared at the ceiling while he slept peacefully. And something cracked. Not a break, just a shift, a fracture in how I saw him, how I saw us. I should have listened then. I should have asked questions. But I didn't. Because asking meant facing the truth, and I wasn't ready. Back in the present, I drove home, not to the condo, to my friend Maya's place. She was out of town, but she'd given me a key years ago. "In case you ever need an escape hatch," she said. I let myself in, sat on her couch, and let the quiet hold me. Then I opened my laptop. Not to post, not to vent, to document. I created a folder called Reclamation. Inside, I began logging everything. Shared bank statements, Melissa's job hunting calendar, David's text from our shared phone plan, and every financial tie I had to that apartment. Because if they wanted to play house in my bed, in my home, under my roof, then they were going to learn what it meant when the foundation fought back. And then came the twist I didn't expect. 2 days later, I went to the leasing office to quietly request that the mortgage be converted to my name only. I had paid 80% of the down payment using a small inheritance from my grandmother. David's credit had been too weak to qualify at the time. But what I found out chilled me. 6 weeks ago, David had filed paperwork to refinance the mortgage, with Melissa listed as a secondary co-borrower. Her name on my home. It hadn't gone through yet. The clerk said it was still pending approval, awaiting my notarized consent. He must have forged my email address to begin the application. I stared at the clerk, heart pounding. "Is there a way I can freeze the file?" I asked, calmly. She looked at me. "If you suspect fraud, absolutely." I filed the complaint right then, froze the process, scheduled a meeting with a lawyer Maya had once recommended. I walked out of that office, sun blazing, blood ice cold. This wasn't just betrayal of the heart. It was theft, financial betrayal. They weren't just cheating behind my back. They were trying to take the roof off my future and hand it to the woman who ate my groceries and called me sis. But if Melissa thought she could replace me, she forgot one thing. I am not the woman who breaks. I am the woman who builds. And now, I was building war. They underestimated me. That was their first mistake. The second, thinking silence, meant surrender. What they didn't realize is that quiet women, especially the ones who fund your lifestyle, don't disappear. They document. We build timelines. We gather facts. We wait. And then we strike. That week, I moved like a shadow, silent, watchful, deliberate. I stayed at Maya's, eating frozen burritos and fueling myself on black coffee and spite. every morning. I'd open my laptop and expand the reclamation folder. It had subfolders now: legal, financial, personal. I added screenshots, receipts, voice memos, anything that built the case against them. But more than facts, I needed truth, the whole ugly arc, so I started calling people carefully. David's old freelance client, a woman named Krista, told me he hadn't submitted her rebrand project, despite claiming he was booked solid. Melissa's former roommate from Portland told me Melissa had a pattern. She'd moved in, maxed out trust, and left wreckage behind, especially when there was a man involved. It wasn't the first time she'd gone after someone's partner. It was the first time someone let her stay long enough to finish the job. That stung, because I hadn't just let her stay. I defended her, funded her, protected her. Years ago, when she spiraled after losing her job at the boutique, it was me who wrote her resume, who took the phone call from the landlord when rent was late. She's trying, I said back then. I wanted so badly to believe that. But the truth, Melissa wasn't lost. She was entitled. A grifter in soft lighting and vintage earrings. And I had been her longest con. 3 days after freezing the fraudulent refinance, I returned to the condo for the first time since the betrayal. I went at noon on a Wednesday. Knowing David would be out, I used my key, walked in, and felt the air shift. Melissa was on the couch. Of course, wearing my robe. She looked up from her phone, startled. Her hair was wet from the shower. My shampoo, my towel.
Emma, what are you doing here?
Her voice cracked halfway through. Not guilt, just surprise. I stared at her, unblinking.
You've got 10 minutes to pack a bag.
She blinked.
What?
This is still legally my property. I've contacted the leasing office. Your refinancing stunt didn't work. You have no standing here. It was David's idea. Oh, I know. I walked past her, into the kitchen, grabbed a tote bag from the pantry, started tossing her essentials into its charger. Wallet. The one decent pair of shoes she didn't borrow from me.
You can keep the robe, I said, dropping it at her feet. You'll need the comfort where you're going.
Melissa looked shaken, but she still tried it. Emma, I didn't mean to fall for him. I froze. Turned slowly. You fell for someone you ate cereal next to for years. In a home I paid for. While I was recovering from surgery. She had the audacity to look teary-eyed. You were so distant, always working. I laughed. Actually laughed. I paid for this roof, for your phone bill, for your food. You called that distant. She looked down. It just happened. I stepped forward. You want to talk about things that just happen? Appendicitis happens. This you plotted, and you lied. Every day, under my roof. I handed her the bag. 10 minutes. After that, I call the cops. And I meant it. I stood by the door as she packed. Quiet now. Her face tight. No apologies, no tears. Just entitlement curdling into fear. She left without saying goodbye. I didn't slam the door. I locked it, deadbolt, chain, security code reset. Then I walked through the apartment. Every corner of it had been touched by betrayal. The couch where she napped. The kitchen where David made breakfast on Sundays. The bedroom. I didn't go in yet. Instead, I went to the guest room, sat at the desk, opened my laptop. The plan had begun. That night, I met with Janine Maya's neighbor and a divorce attorney who specialized in asset recovery for wronged women. Her words, not mine. We sat at a cafe, sipping decaf and reviewing documents. You're in a strong position, she said. You funded most of the property. His contributions are minimal, but you'll need evidence of misuse if you want to push for damages. I slid over a folder. Inside screenshots, texts, a log of their suspicious behavior. Timestamps. A journal of lies. She flipped through it, impressed.
Emma, this is thorough.
They made the mistake of thinking silence meant I wasn't paying attention. Janine smiled. We'll file this strategically. First, freeze joint accounts. Second, remove his name from all shared utilities. Third, initiate discovery and expose the refinancing attempt. And Melissa, I asked? Technically, she's a squatter. You did good getting her out. She has no claim. I left that meeting with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Power. I had lost love, but I had not lost leverage. A week later, I sat in the bedroom, finally. The bed was stripped bare. No sheets, just the mattress, 4-poster frame still sturdy. The one David and I built together, sweating and cursing through assembly. It used to feel like commitment. Now, it was evidence of how I build things that others just use. I lit a single candle, not for romance, but for ritual. Then I opened a small wooden box from the closet. Inside, a photo of David and me on our wedding day. One of Melissa and me on a hike, years ago, grinning like sisters from a toothpaste commercial. I placed them side by side, and I burned them. Watched as flame curled through smiles and vows, as ashes formed in the base of the candle dish. Symbolism matters. That was the second thing I let go of. Not pain, not yet, but hope in them. Because what came next wasn't revenge. It was reclamation, and I was just getting started. After I burned the photos, I didn't cry, not even a little. It was like I had finally cleared out the last rotting root of something that had been dying for years. The flames didn't hurt, they healed. I slept that night in the guest room, not because I was scared of the bedroom, but because that room, for once, belonged only to me. No ghosts, no memories, just silence and intention. When I woke up the next morning, I made a list. I didn't title it Revenge. That would have been too theatrical. I called it Rebuild, but louder. And the first item on the list, take back my name. Because here's something nobody talks about in betrayal stories, how much your identity gets buried inside someone else's comfort. Every password I had included David's birthday, every account joint, every emergency contact him. Even my Spotify had his morning playlist clogging the algorithm. I spent 2 full days scrubbing my digital footprint. New bank account, new credit card, new passwords, canceled Netflix, reclaimed my Amazon Prime. And when the email hit his inbox, "You've been removed from this account," I pictured him frowning at the screen. Confused. Good. The second item on the list, reframe the narrative. See, people think revenge means destroying someone publicly. But I wasn't interested in theatrics. I wanted clarity, the kind that pierces denial, quiet, icy, unshakable. I began collecting documentation, not just legal, but emotional. Voice memos detailing what I remembered. Emails I sent to myself with dates, times, moods. Photos from family holidays, now annotated with what I should have noticed. This wasn't paranoia, it was strategy. Because soon, people would ask, how could they do this to you? And I wanted the answer to be, they did it long before I found out. But let me tell you where it got interesting. The third item on my list was find the leverage. And that's when I thought of Julia. Julia's a neighbor, early 60s, divorced twice, retired paralegal, loves crime thrillers, and always waters her plants in a sun hat with a lemon-printed ribbon. We'd exchanged neighborly waves over the years, but never got close. Until the day she knocked on my door 2 days after Melissa left. She held a Tupperware of lemon bars and gave me a long, knowing look. "You home now, Emma?" "Just getting things in order." She nodded, walked in like she'd been doing it for years, set the lemon bars on the counter, and got straight to it. "That little sister of yours,
She's lucky I didn't call the cops.
What happened?
I saw her and your husband screaming in the parking lot last week, around midnight. She threw a takeout container at him, called him a spineless coward, told him he wasn't worth the settlement.
I blinked.
The what?
That's what I thought. So I stayed quiet and eavesdropped like any good senior citizen.
She smiled, then continued.
Apparently, your husband promised her something if she kept quiet. Money. Maybe. A cut of something. But it's clear things aren't going to plan. I stood frozen, heart racing. Because that was the twist I didn't see coming.
David didn't just cheat.
He made a deal with my sister. Maybe it was access to the house. Maybe he promised her partial ownership. Maybe he told her he'd divorce me and they'd live off the equity of the apartment, my apartment. Whatever it was, the cracks were forming between them now. Fast.
And Julia, she'd just given me something better than gossip.
A timeline. Do you happen to remember the exact day you saw them arguing? I do. I had on my Tuesday lawn playlist 80s jazz, and I water the ficus on Tuesdays. She winked. I recorded everything she said. Then I thanked her, twice, and offered to return the lemon bars. Keep them. Hon, you're gonna need sugar for what's coming. She was right. Because what came next? Item 4. Turn the tables. Slowly. I reached out to HR at my company and updated all my emergency contacts, removed David, replaced him with Maya. Then I called a locksmith, changed the locks, installed cameras, reprogrammed the gate code. Then I waited.
3 days later, David showed up.
He didn't knock at first, just stood at the door, staring into the Ring camera. I watched from inside, sipping coffee like it was just another Monday. Eventually, he knocked 3 times, short, then long. I opened the door just enough. You changed the locks. That's what people do when strangers try to steal their home.
Emma, come on. Don't be dramatic.
Is that what Melissa said when she threw takeout at you in the parking lot? His face changed just slightly, a flicker of fear. What do you want from me? What I've always wanted, the truth. He shifted. It started when we were drunk. You were always busy. She was around. So you fell into her like an accident.
It wasn't like that.
Then tell me what it was, because I have voice memos, bank records, and now a witness. His mouth opened, then closed. I want you out of the apartment. For good. I said calmly. I'm filing for separation and asset protection. You'll get the documents by Friday. Emma, we're done.
And then I closed the door.
Not hard, not fast. Just final. Cliffhanger to part 5. But what I didn't tell him was that the lemon bars Julia brought weren't the only gift. She had footage, and in that footage, Melissa said something I could use. Something they'd both regret. Julia's lemon bars were sweet. But the real treat was the flash drive taped under the container. I found it later that night while rinsing dishes. Something hard clinked under the plastic lid. My breath caught. I peeled back the foil, and there it was, a tiny red USB, labeled only with a smiley face sticker. Classic Julia. I plugged it into my laptop with trembling fingers. My heart pounded so loud. I could barely hear the audio at first. It was a Ring cam recording hers, from the garden path. The date stamp, 2 weeks before I walked in on David and Melissa. The video showed the two of them standing under Julia's bougainvillea trellis at night, whispering heatedly. It was grainy, but the voices were crystal clear. You said I'd get the money before you filed, Melissa hissed. I'm working on it, David replied. She's suspicious now. I can't just transfer everything.
Then make her suspicious of something else.
Like what? I don't know, cheat on her. You're good at that. There was a pause. Then the sound of Melissa lighting a cigarette. If you screw me over, David, I swear to God. Relax. You'll get your share. Once the equity clears and she signs off on the new deed, my stomach dropped. This wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated fraud, a financial ambush, staged to collapse my security and hand it to them like an inheritance I didn't die for. I sat still for a long time. Then I copied the file 3 times, one on the cloud, one to my external drive, and one sent to Janine, my lawyer, with the subject line, Asset Manipulation, Recorded Evidence, Use as Needed. Within the hour, Janine replied, Emma, this is gold. We can press charges for conspiracy to defraud. Want to move forward? I stared at that message. Beneath my calm, a question pulsed. Was I ready for court? Ready for months of hearings, mediation, ugly family text chains, and public unraveling? The answer surprised me. Yes, because justice isn't loud, it's deliberate. And I wanted this process to hurt exactly as long as it needed to, not out of vengeance, but out of truth. So I wrote back, yes, start with discovery. They won't know what hit them. That week, I began phase 2 of the plan. Not legal this time, personal. It started with the wedding photo, not the one I burned. The copy I had tucked away in a file box. David didn't know it existed. I scanned it, edited the caption. From our beginning. To he said, forever. He meant until my sister moved in. Then I posted it on a new Instagram account, @rebuildbutlouder. Just one photo, no hashtags, no follow-backs. Within a day, it hit 2,000 followers. Strangers DM'd me their own stories. Cheating husbands, backstabbing siblings, financial betrayal dressed up in family dinners. Turns out, the betrayal I thought was rare was epidemic. And that solidarity gave me fuel. Each post became a breadcrumb, never enough to be legally defamatory, just enough to expose patterns. A text from David. Why are people tagging me in this account? I ignored it. A voicemail from Melissa. You're seriously being that petty? I laughed out loud. Because I wasn't being petty. I was being precise. A few days later, the process server showed up at David's new co-working space downtown. He had moved there after a failed pitch meeting got him kicked out of his last freelance gig. According to LinkedIn, he was now repositioning as a brand storyteller, whatever that meant. He opened the envelope in full view of his colleagues. Inside, a cease and desist order, evidence of forged documents, and a formal notice of asset discovery. Janine made sure the language was sharp, legally airtight, emotionally lethal. He tried calling me 5 times. I didn't pick up, but I listened to every voicemail. Emma, please, this is overkill. You're destroying everything. You don't have to do this. But I did, and I would, because the moment he decided to rewrite my future behind my back, he gave up the right to comfort. This wasn't overkill. This was balance. But it wasn't all victories. One night, I got a message from Mom. Just one sentence. I don't know what happened, but families should never turn to lawyers. I sat with that for a while, because this was also part of the betrayal. The subtle way women are asked to absorb damage to preserve family peace. We're told to move on, be the bigger person, don't let bitterness define you. But here's the truth. Justice is not bitterness. Justice is boundary. Justice is clarity. Justice is how you teach people that your worth is not a donation they can split when they're bored. So I didn't reply to my mom's text, but I saved it. And maybe one day, I'll post that too. As another reminder that silence isn't forgiveness. It's prep because I wasn't done, not until Melissa lost what mattered most to her, her public image. And I had just the plan. Melissa always cared about appearances. Even when we were kids. She cried harder when her outfit got dirty than when she scraped her knee. Her real fear wasn't pain, it was humiliation. That's why my next move was simple. Let the world see her. Not through revenge porn, not with some viral expose. No. I wanted to hold up a mirror and let her watch herself rot.
It started with a podcast.
She'd finally launched that urban healing show she'd been threatening to make for years. It had a pastel Instagram page, a few dreamy filter posts, and a slogan that made me laugh out loud. Radical honesty, soft power. Honest. Okay.
Let's get honest.
I submitted a listener question under a fake name. What should I do if my sister slept with my husband under my roof? Tried to steal my house, and then pretended it was all spiritual alignment. 2 weeks later, I heard her voice on air, all breathy calm.
Sometimes people are trapped in old energy patterns. We mirror what others project. If someone feels betrayed, it might be because they were holding back.
My jaw dropped. That was her brand now. Victim blaming in lavender tones.
So I posted the clip anonymously on Reddit, TikTok, and my burner IG. Caption:
When the woman who blew up your marriage tries to rebrand as a healer. It didn't take long.
The internet is allergic to hypocrisy.
Within 48 hours, her follower count tanked. Comments turned. Someone dug up her old Etsy store reviews complaints about items never shipped and ghosted refunds. Then came the quote tweets. Dozens of them. Women who recognized the pattern. She sounds like the kind of girl who steals your charger and your boyfriend. And then my favorite moment? A clip surfaced from Julia's Ring camera. Again. But this time, posted by Julia's niece, who worked in social media compliance. The caption: This healer says she believes in alignment. Here she is threatening a man for not paying her to lie. It went viral. Even if they didn't know exactly what happened, the vibe was clear. Melissa wasn't misunderstood. She was a manipulator with better lighting. David, meanwhile, had gone quiet. Too quiet. Until I got the email from his lawyer. He was trying to settle, quickly, privately. Offer me full ownership of the condo if I'd stop all public defamation. I smiled at my screen. Because here's the truth. I never mentioned his name, never posted photos, never linked anything provably back to him. That was what scared him. I had mastered the line between revenge and reputation management. Janine drafted the response. We will entertain your offer under the following conditions.
Full property transfer.
No financial obligation from our client. Written admission of mortgage tampering. Formal apology. He balked at number 4. But eventually, he signed it. That was the thing about David. He was weak. Melissa was reckless. Together. They built a bomb they didn't know how to disarm. And I just watched it tick. The formal handoff happened in a neutral office downtown. David walked in with his lawyer, looking 10 pounds thinner, stress in every line of his jaw. Melissa didn't come. Word had it she was on retreat. I didn't speak, just signed. Calm, clean strokes. As I stood to leave, he reached out. Emma, for what it's worth. I didn't let him finish. It's worth nothing. You already spent your credit. I walked out. That moment felt better than any breakup speech I'd rehearsed in my head. Better than any revenge fantasy I'd ever scribbled into my journal. Because it was real, public, permanent. Afterward, I took a slow walk along the bay, let the wind press against me like an embrace, watched the gulls spiral above the water, wild and unbothered. That was the first time I noticed it. The absence of weight. No more shared passwords. No more walking on eggshells. No more worrying if I was too much for someone who gave me so little. I bought myself a lavender latte, sat by the window, and watched a little girl blow bubbles in the sunlight. She looked up at her mother and shouted, I made it big this time. I smiled. Because same? Later that night, I returned to the condo, my home, alone but not lonely. and sitting on the counter was something I hadn't seen in weeks. A box. Melissa's handwriting on the front. Emma, I figured you'd want these back. Inside, photos, a few books, and at the very bottom, her old rose pendant necklace, the one I had thrown away weeks ago. I held it in my hand, cool and smooth, familiar. Then I dropped it in the trash without flinching. That was the third and final thing I let go of. Her. But as I stood in the kitchen, one last notification pinged on my phone. A new email, no subject line. From Mom. And what she wrote changed everything. The email from Mom was only 5 sentences long. No Dear Emma, no signature, just cold pixels on a white screen. Melissa told me her side. I know she made mistakes, but so did you. You could have forgiven her. Family isn't disposable. I'm disappointed you made this so public. I stared at the screen, unmoving. The ache didn't come all at once, it built, slow and cruel, like a fever breaking. After everything, after my silence, after my protection, after losing a marriage and a home, I paid for she was disappointed in me. That was the final betrayal. Not from a lover, not from a sister, but from the one person who was supposed to know me. I sat in my kitchen, the late lights slanting across the floor, cutting my face in half, warm on one side, cold on the other. And I felt it. Not anger, not sorrow, but completion. Because you can't grieve a bridge once it's burned. You walk away. A week later, I stood in my condo, and looked out at the city. Autumn had started to press against the windows, crisp and gold. I lit a candle, not for memory this time. It was celebration. I'd won the legal battle. Melissa's podcast had been pulled from Spotify for violations of integrity. David had moved to Austin to reset, and Mom hadn't followed up once. Peace wasn't loud. It was this no more explaining myself. I took a breath. Then I posted one last thing on the @RebuildButLouder account. Just a single sentence, over a blank background. I stopped bleeding for people who wouldn't even offer a Band-Aid. It got shared, a lot. But I didn't track the numbers this time. Because this post was for me. Here's what nobody tells you about healing. It doesn't look like yoga retreats or smoothies or burning sage on your windowsill. It looks like updating your emergency contact. It looks like getting your name off a shared phone plan. It looks like sleeping through the night because you're no longer bracing for betrayal. Healing is boring sometimes, but boring is safe. And safe is sacred. I never spoke to Melissa again. But I did hear through Maya that she tried starting a new podcast this time on female accountability. Irony has excellent timing. As for David, he emailed me a few months ago, said he was in therapy, rebuilding trust. He called it. I didn't reply. Some stories don't need sequels, they just need endings. But don't mistake peace for passivity. I didn't let go of the anger. I repurposed it. That burn became fuel for something better. I started consulting for women in financial abuse situations, help them document, organize, fight back. Turns out there's a whole army of women who've been robbed by the people they trusted most. And they don't need pity, they need strategy. That's the real revolution, not screaming into the void, but building structures where betrayal used to live. One afternoon, as I left a community meeting, a woman stopped me in the parking lot. She looked around my age, wore a navy blazer over yoga pants, and carried a binder labeled Evidence. Are you the woman from @RebuildButLouder? She asked. Used to be, I said. She smiled, a little embarrassed. I just wanted to say, I left my husband because of what you posted. I thought I was crazy until I saw your story. I felt a rush, not pride, not ego, just connection. The kind that says, I see you, I believe you, you're not alone. What's your next step? I asked. She held up the binder. War, but smarter. We laughed. And I thought, yes, that's exactly it. So what's the lesson here? It's not that men are evil or sisters are snakes. It's that betrayal doesn't have to define you. You can transmute it, rewire it, turn pain into architecture, turn anger into advocacy. You can walk out of the fire holding the match. If you've made it this far, thank you. Not just for listening to my story, but for being brave enough to consider your own. And if you've been betrayed, here's my advice. Don't beg them to understand. Don't wait for an apology. Don't make small to keep their peace. Instead, gather your evidence. Call your lawyer. Light your own damn candle. Because you don't owe anyone closure when they gave you chaos. You owe yourself a beginning. And this was mine. If this story hit close to home, drop a comment and let me know you're reclaiming too. Like, subscribe, share with someone who needs to hear this. And remember, some women don't just bounce back. We rebuild. But louder, story 2. My name is Jessica Morgan. I'm 32 years old, a family court judge in San Diego, and last Friday night, I stood frozen at my sister's engagement dinner while her fiancé turned to me and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're the judge tonight. Tell them what really happened 5 years ago." The room went silent. All the crystal glasses, the flower arrangements, the laughter had stopped like someone had pulled the power plug. Rachel, my sister, dropped her fork. My father stiffened. My mother blinked. Once, twice, like her mind was buffering. But me, I sat there, hands trembling in my lap, every cell in my body screaming to flee. But I didn't. I just stared back at Marcus, her fiancé, and thought, he knows. He knows what Rachel did. He knows what I gave up. He knows I've been silent for 5 years, carrying a truth that hollowed me out from the inside. And now, he wants me to spill it. But before I take you back to the moment that broke me and explain how this elegant dinner party turned into a courtroom without walls, I want to ask, have you ever been the one who kept the family secret? The one who stayed quiet? Because speaking up meant losing everyone. If that's you or ever was you, hit the like button and subscribe, because this story is for every person who's ever sacrificed themselves for someone who would never do the same. Let me rewind the tape for you. It didn't start with the dinner. It didn't even start 5 years ago. It started long before that with a chair. Yeah, a chair, a literal, physical chair. When I was 12, my mom got a brand new dining table, heavy walnut, polished to a mirror finish. It had 8 matching chairs. Rachel, who was 10, insisted on the one with the carved back and slightly curved legs. It's the princess chair, she called it. And even though I was older, taller, and had gotten straight A's on my math test that week, my mom handed it to her without hesitation. "Let her have it, Jess," she said. "She's delicate." That phrase would become the family anthem. Rachel is delicate. Rachel needs protecting. Rachel's just different. Meanwhile, I was the strong one, the reliable one, the one who cleaned up her messes, quietly, repeatedly. I didn't mind. Not at first. I told myself love meant absorbing, not questioning. That if I worked harder, got better grades, helped around the house more, never talked back, maybe they'd see me too. Spoiler, they didn't. When I left for college, I worked 2 jobs. My parents could have helped me, but that money was set aside for Rachel. She might need more support. My dad said, "You're resourceful." She's not. They weren't wrong. I was resourceful. I made it through UCLA law with honors, passed the bar on my first try, and landed a job at a reputable family law firm. Meanwhile, Rachel was drifting. She launched and abandoned businesses like Mood Swings, an organic candle brand, a travel vlogging channel, a stint as a raw food coach that ended after 3 weeks because she couldn't stop eating hot Cheetos. Each failure was met with, "She's finding herself." Each of my successes was met with polite nods and, "That's nice, honey." But I still believed we were sisters. That meant something. Even when she borrowed money and forgot to return it. Even when she slept with a guy I had been dating casually. Even when she showed up to a job interview I had lined up and told everyone it was just a coincidence. Each time I swallowed it, buried it, told myself she's family. This is what sisters do. Then came the day everything changed. 5 years ago, Rachel showed up at my doorstep with a baby 6 months old, red-faced, screaming. "This is Mason," she said, like she was handing me a dog she couldn't board. I stood there in my bathrobe, still half asleep, stunned. "Whose?" I began. "He's mine," she said. "I'm not ready. I need space. A silent retreat in Big Sur." A retreat? I asked a dozen questions. She had answers to none. "Please, Jess, just a few days." A few days turned into a week. A week turned into 12. No diapers, no instructions, just me, a demanding career, and a baby I didn't birth but fed, rocked, soothed, and loved. Then, one night, I collapsed with a 103-degree fever. Turned out, I had a uterine infection from a prior emergency procedure I'd had years earlier, something I never fully recovered from due to stress and sleep deprivation. The damage was irreversible. I survived, barely, but I'd never be able to carry a child again. When Rachel returned, she said, "You're such a good sister. You've got that maternal thing I never had." Then she scooped up Mason, kissed my cheek, and left, like it had all been a dream. I didn't tell anyone. Not our parents, not my friends, not even Beth. My cousin who's a therapist and probably could have walked me through it. I buried it deep, because part of me still thought, that's what sisters do. And for years, I watched Rachel rise in social status. Her Instagram turned into a curated highlight reel. Yoga at sunrise, couple goals, paid partnerships. Her baby disappeared from her feed. Marcus replaced him. Marcus, her fiancé, the prosecutor. At first, I thought he might be good for her, stable, grounded, not the usual narcissist she dated. But then he started showing up to family events, and something changed. He started looking at me differently, not romantically, not suspiciously, like he was watching someone hold her breath for too long. One night after a family barbecue, he caught me washing dishes alone. He said, "You always take care of everyone, don't you?" I didn't answer. Then he added, "Must be exhausting being the invisible one." That was the first time I felt it, a crack in the facade. And still, I didn't tell him anything. I thought it didn't matter anymore. I'd built my life back up. I was a respected judge. I had purpose, even if I didn't have a child, or a partner, or a family that truly saw me. Then came the engagement dinner. The guest list was bloated. Marcus's family flew in from Boston. Rachel wore a red gown like she was accepting an Oscar. Everything was perfect, too perfect. The table was set with place cards and calligraphy. Of course. I was seated directly across from Rachel and Marcus. And right beside me, an empty chair. Not a single guest showed late. No last-minute cancellation. Just a chair. It sat there like a symbol of who I used to be, of the space I never got to fill. And I couldn't help but think, did Rachel place it there on purpose? She knew how to sting in symbols. Her cruelty was rarely loud. It was exquisitely, surgically precise. When dessert arrived, she leaned in, smiled, and said, "Jess, have you considered adoption? Or maybe freezing your eggs before it's too late?" The air left my lungs. I stared at her. She sipped champagne like she'd said nothing.
And just when I thought I couldn't breathe, Marcus stood up, raised his glass, looked at me, and said, "Jessica, since you're the judge in this family, why don't you tell them what really happened 5 years ago?"
That empty chair suddenly felt like it had caught fire. And I realized the trial had already begun. Let me take you back. Before Marcus's words shattered the dinner table like a dropped wine glass, before the empty chair beside me became a symbol of everything I'd lost, before truth even had a voice. You see, Rachel and I, we weren't always enemies. There were days, rare and blurred by time, when we were just two girls playing on the same swing set, but somewhere between scraped knees and college admissions, things changed. Not suddenly, not violently, slowly, like water dripping through a crack in the ceiling until the entire house rots from within. My parents weren't villains, not in the movie villain sense. Anyway, they were the kind of people who praised obedience and mistook silence for respect. They believed Rachel was fragile, born sensitive. My mom used to say, she cried easily, quit piano after 3 lessons, couldn't handle any criticism without tears. So they coddled her. And I adapted, like oldest daughters do. I learned to self-regulate. I became low maintenance, high achieving, low complaint. I didn't realize until much later that I'd been conditioned to see love as something earned, not given. Rachel, meanwhile, was given everything but learned nothing. After her sabbatical in Europe, a summer funded by our parents, where she found herself in Tuscany and came back with a tan and a vague business idea, she floated from project to project. No stability, no accountability, but constant praise. Even when she burned through 10,000 of their money trying to launch a luxury dog accessories brand, my dad said, "At least she's trying." I graduated UCLA Law, top of my class. They said, "That's great, honey. Rachel's thinking of doing a podcast." I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because in my family, emotions, especially female emotions, were categorized as overreactions. So I tucked my feelings into neat little boxes and buried them under credentials. I became a judge before 30. And when I told my parents, my mom smiled and said, "Well, maybe now you'll find a nice man who isn't intimidated by you." That's the thing about achievements in the wrong environment. They don't feel like milestones. They feel like weapons turned against you. Rachel showed up at my investiture wearing white. Not cream, not ivory, white. Floor length, sequined, like a bridal gown. People whispered. Cameras clicked. She basked in it. I gave my acceptance speech. My voice didn't shake, but my heart did. Because the one person I wanted in the front row wasn't there. I'd miscarried 6 months earlier, quietly, at home, alone. It wasn't a pregnancy I planned, but I'd wanted it, badly. The silence afterward was suffocating, and my family never knew. Rachel got a new boyfriend 2 weeks later, some tech bro named Luke. She moved into his condo in Venice Beach, said they were soulmates. She called me crying one night, said she was pregnant and terrified, said she wasn't ready to be a mom. And just like that, I was babysitting Mason, her child, with no warning, no paperwork, no backup plan. He was colicky. Wouldn't sleep more than an hour. I juggled court hearings, midnight bottles, dirty onesies. The stress wore me thin. I lost 10 pounds in 2 weeks. Then came the fever, the ER, the sterile ceiling tiles above my hospital bed. The diagnosis. The irreversible news. My uterus was done. Done carrying. Done dreaming. Done. And Rachel, she said, "You're better with kids anyway. I just get anxious." Then she took Mason and moved on like it was a sleepover gone long. I kept the hospital bracelet. I still have it. Sometimes I hold it between my fingers like rosary beads. Not for mourning, but to remember. I didn't tell anyone, not even Beth. But Beth, she always sensed it. The imbalance. The erasure. She once told me, Your family doesn't see your pain because you carry it too well. Beth's a therapist. She says things like that. But that one stuck. Because it was true. Every Thanksgiving, I smiled through passive-aggressive digs. Every Christmas, I bought Rachel more expensive gifts than she gave me. Every birthday, I watched our parents post about hers like it was a national holiday, and mine silence. Still, I showed up. Because that's what we're told, right? Family comes first, even when it crushes you. Marcus was the only variable I didn't predict. He was polished, educated, morally rigid, the kind of man who remembered names, held doors, sent handwritten thank you notes. Rachel said they met at a legal fundraiser. I didn't believe her. Turned out she met him through one of my old law school colleagues, used my name as a reference, claimed we were co-counsel on a custody case. That lie should have been my first clue, but again I swallowed it. Marcus was friendly, but distant. For the first few months, I assumed he thought I was cold. Then came a moment. A dinner at my parents' house. Rachel had just made some snide comment, something about me preferring the courtroom to the bedroom. I smiled, polite, hollow. Marcus glanced at me. His expression didn't shift. But when he caught me alone in the kitchen later, he asked, "Is she always like that with you?" I hesitated, like what? He said, "Performative cruelty, dressed up as banter." That was the moment I knew he saw it. He didn't say more, but his eyes said everything. Over the next few gatherings, I noticed his glances lingered longer. He started asking subtle questions about my work, my friends, my past. I stayed vague. I didn't know if I could trust him. Rachel had a way of breaking good men and painting herself the victim. Still, Marcus made space for me. And then came the dinner. The red dress, the empty chair, the dig about freezing eggs, and Marcus's words. Tell them what really happened 5 years ago. In that moment, the world didn't spin. It paused. My mother looked stunned. My father frowned. Rachel choked on her champagne. And me. My body went cold. My throat clenched. The room blurred around me, but the empty chair beside me, it sharpened. I suddenly saw it not as absence, but invitation. A space to rise, to speak, to stop pretending. And so I opened my mouth. But before I could say a word, Rachel slammed her glass down and said, "Don't you dare." Her voice shook, but it wasn't fear. It was fury, because she knew if I spoke, her crown would crack. "Don't you dare," Rachel hissed, loud enough for the table to hear, but just soft enough to pretend it wasn't a threat. Every head turned. The tension in the room felt like the air before a thunderclap, silent, thick, electric. My mother's eyes darted between us, panic flickering behind her lashes. My father cleared his throat like he was about to redirect the conversation. But even he knew this wasn't a conversation anymore. This was a reckoning. I met Rachel's glare with something I hadn't summoned in years, calm defiance. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel like the lesser daughter. I felt like a woman who had survived and was done shrinking. But I didn't speak, not yet. Instead, I set down my fork, lifted my napkin with careful, deliberate fingers, and placed it gently on my lap. A signal, a warning, a pause before the verdict. Beth, seated diagonally across from me, caught my eye. She didn't nod, didn't flinch, just witnessed. Sometimes that's all we need, someone to stay still while the truth arrives. Rachel tried to laugh, this high-pitched, too sweet sound she used when trying to deflect. "Oh my God, Marcus," she said, "you and your courtroom drama. Honestly, Jessica has the best poker face. You should see her during game night. Remember?" She turned to the guests like an actress breaking the fourth wall. Only this time, No one laughed. Not even her. I leaned forward slightly, voice steady. 5 years ago, Rachel showed up at my apartment with a 6-month-old baby, no warning, no supplies, and said she needed a break, a retreat. Rachel froze. The word retreat was a bullet with her name on it. She left. For nearly 2 weeks. Didn't answer calls. Didn't check in. I was juggling work and that baby her baby with no help, no sleep. I ended up in the ER. And I left the hospital with a diagnosis that changed my life. I looked at Marcus. He didn't blink. I can't have children anymore. Because of what she did. A plate clattered somewhere to the left. Someone gasped. My father leaned back like the chair had burned him. Rachel slammed her palm on the table. This is insane. She's twisting everything. You always wanted to be the martyr. Jess, you've hated me since we were kids. Just admit it. I didn't respond. Not to her lies, not to her spin. Because Marcus was already reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket. And what he pulled out? A folded manila envelope. Thick, sealed. He slid it onto the table, right between Rachel and me. That's your hospital record. Jessica, and the texts Rachel sent around that time. He turned to the room. I subpoenaed them. I had to. Something didn't sit right. Rachel's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. You what? You spied on me. No, Marcus said calmly. I fact-checked you. That line felt like justice. Not the kind in a courtroom, but the kind that makes your spine straighten and your hands stop shaking. Rachel stood up, knocked over her champagne.
Are you serious right now? You're humiliating me at my own engagement dinner.
You humiliated yourself, Marcus replied. You lied. You used your sister like a nanny and left her to bleed alone. Everyone was silent. Even my mother, who for years had defended Rachel like it was her full-time job, sat frozen. Lips parted, eyes wide. Beth reached out and, without a word, placed her hand on mine under the table. A grounding, a tether. Rachel backed away from the table, voice rising. This is insane. You people are insane, Jess. You've always been jealous. Admit it. You wanted Marcus. You wanted my life. That's what this is about. I stood. Not in fury, not in chaos. In clarity. I wanted a sister who didn't weaponize my silence. That line, I hadn't rehearsed it, but it came from somewhere deep buried under years of swallowed screams and empty birthdays. Rachel turned to our parents.
Are you seriously going to let her say this? Are you going to let him expose me like this?
And for the first time, they didn't answer. They just sat there, watching the illusion melt. Rachel stormed out. Not quietly, not gracefully. Her heels clipped the hardwood like gunfire. Her red dress swayed behind her like the tail of a warning flare. The room exhaled. I looked at Marcus. He nodded once. Not approval, not pity. Acknowledgement. Then he sat back down, picked up his fork, and said, "Let's eat." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a dinner. It was an exorcism. But the ghosts weren't gone yet. Because when I walked to the guest bathroom 10 minutes later, I saw it. A framed photo on the hallway wall. Me and Rachel, age 5 and 7, on matching bikes. She was laughing. I was holding her steady. The past hung like a trophy in a house built on denial. And as I looked at that photo, something shifted in my chest. Because I knew. This story wasn't over. The truth had landed, but the consequences were only just beginning. You'd think that after a bomb like that, everything would crumble fast, that there'd be shouting, apologies, people storming out with coats half on. But the truth, most families don't implode with sound. They rot in silence. After Rachel fled the engagement dinner, the room slowly reassembled itself. Glasses refilled. Nervous laughter echoed. A few guests left early, murmuring half-hearted excuses about early mornings or babysitters. But the core my parents, Marcus, Beth, and me, we stayed. I sat in that same chair, napkin now wrinkled in my lap like a flag after battle. The empty one beside me remained untouched, still haunting. Beth leaned over, whispering, "Are you okay?" It took me a second to answer. "I don't know," I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said all year. That night, I didn't go home right away. Marcus caught me just as I was walking to my car. His voice was quiet. "Careful. I didn't want to blindside you." I crossed my arms against the chill. "But you did." He nodded. No defense, no excuses. Just stood there under the parking lot lights, like a man holding two truths in each hand, and finally realizing they both weigh too much. "I found the record 6 months ago," he admitted. Rachel had been cagey about her past, and one day, after another one of her lies didn't add up, I looked into it. The hospital files weren't hard to pull. Given your name was on the emergency contact, and then I found the texts. He paused. "Jess, I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't want to be another man who dismissed a woman's pain just because she didn't scream it." That line cracked something in me, a fissure I'd tried to keep sealed. He took a breath. "I needed you to speak it, not because I didn't believe you, but because you needed to believe yourself." My throat tightened. My hands burned cold. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. His answer was immediate. "I'm not marrying someone who destroys people to preserve an image." And just like that, I realized he wasn't part of her performance anymore. He'd stepped off the stage. But I hadn't. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up with a weight in my chest that no sleep could clear. I made coffee, burned my toast, ignored texts from colleagues who'd heard about the drama through mutual connections. And then, I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I pulled out the box, the one tucked in the back of my closet, inside Mason's pacifier, the hospital bracelet, a photo Rachel accidentally left behind her holding him, wild-eyed but strangely soft. I stared at it. He'd be 5 now. Kindergarten, soccer cleats, crayon drawings taped to the fridge. I never got to say goodbye. I never got closure. I just handed him back and disappeared from his life like I was never there. That wasn't justice. That wasn't love. That was self-erasure. And I was done erasing. So I made a plan. I'm a judge. I've handled custody cases, child protection hearings, emergency injunctions. I know the law. I know how to move carefully. But this time, it wasn't about legalities. It was about truth. I needed to find Mason. Not for revenge, but for something deeper. Redemption. Completion. A chance to look him in the eyes, even if just once, and say I was there. I loved you. You weren't a mistake. First, I started with public records. Rachel's address was still listed as the Venice condo, but she'd moved out long ago. Then I traced old daycare receipts she left at my place during Mason's stay. One of them had a center name with a phone number I remembered scribbling on the fridge. The place was still open, run by a kind woman named Angela. When I called, I used my judge credentials. Didn't lie, just said I was following up on a family matter involving a former minor in my care. Angela remembered Mason. "He was a sweet boy," she said. "Didn't talk much, but he loved puzzles. His mom pulled him out after 3 months, said she found a private nanny. I asked if she had any emergency contacts on file besides Rachel. She paused. Yes, actually, one number. It wasn't Rachel's. It was someone named Caroline." I froze. Caroline, our aunt, estranged, lived in Santa Cruz. We hadn't spoken in years. Rachel used her as a backup. That didn't make sense. I dug deeper. Beth offered to help. She wasn't just a therapist, she had contacts, subtle tools of persuasion, and a deeply buried dislike of how Rachel had been pedestalized for years. She found something I didn't expect. Custody papers. Not legal, not filed through courts, but notarized, private. Rachel had given full guardianship of Mason to someone named Danielle Myers. No last name match, no known connection. But the signature Rachel's, the date a week after she took Mason back from me. My heart punched against my ribs. I looked up Danielle Myers. She ran a childcare nonprofit in Fresno, married, 2 kids, no criminal history. Her husband, a former social worker. Why would Rachel give up her own child, quietly, and to strangers? Beth had a theory. She didn't want to be a mother, but she didn't want anyone to know she wasn't one. Image over integrity. Again. I needed to see Mason. I needed the truth, not just about what Rachel did to me, but what she did to him. But if I contacted Danielle directly, it could trigger alarms. I needed to do it right, clean. So I called in a favor from someone I once helped win a tough custody battle, a family attorney who owed me big. He agreed to draft a formal request for visitation inquiry framed around potential emotional bonds relevant to the child's developmental history. Legal jargon, but I knew what it meant. I wanted one meeting, 1 hour, one chance to be more than a ghost. Before submitting it, I needed to prepare for fallout. Because once Rachel found out I was looking, she'd do everything in her power to stop me. And based on how quickly she sent me a cease and desist letter 3 days later, she wasn't just scared, she was furious. The letter came by courier, hand-delivered to my chambers. One sentence burned hotter than the rest. Any further interference with my family will result in legal consequences. Not our family. Her family. Just like that, I knew. Rachel was ready for war. The moment I opened Rachel's cease and desist letter, I knew she wasn't trying to protect Mason, she was trying to protect herself. She didn't want the truth leaking, not to the family, not to the public, not to anyone who might ask why a lifestyle influencer with a carefully curated brand of authenticity had secretly signed away her child. But here's the thing about legal threats, they only scare people who don't know the law. I do. I read her letter 3 times. Not a single sentence was grounded in enforceable action. Just emotional intimidation dressed up in legalese. No court orders. No confidentiality clauses. Just her signature and her lawyer's posturing. Rachel wasn't trying to stop me. She was trying to rattle me. And for a minute it worked. But then I remembered something Marcus said the night of the engagement dinner. When everyone had left and the dishes were still half full. There's a reason she always struck first. It's because she knew if you ever hit back, she wouldn't survive it. I'd spent my whole life dodging Rachel's emotional grenades. This time, I was done ducking. So I filed the request. A formal petition not to challenge custody, but to request contact based on prior caregiving status. It was a long shot. But I had documentation, medical records, photos, witnesses, and one key name I hadn't expected. Danielle Myers. Danielle didn't respond right away, but 3 days later, I got a voicemail. Her voice was steady, kind, careful.
Hi, Jessica. I got your letter. I think we should talk. I have questions.
That night, we met at a small cafe halfway between Fresno and San Diego. Neutral ground. She wore jeans and a forest green sweater. No makeup, no performance. Just a woman who looked like she'd carried a lot in silence, too. I introduced myself. She already knew who I was. He talked about you, she said, after a sip of tea. I blinked. Mason. She nodded. He used to call you Judge Jess. Said you had a voice that made bad dreams go away. I didn't expect to cry, but I did. Right there, in public. No shame. Danielle reached across the table. Didn't say anything. Just let me sob like a woman grieving a child she technically never had. When I could speak, I asked the question that had kept me up for years.
Why did Rachel give him to you?
Danielle didn't flinch. She looked me dead in the eye. Because she knew I'd never ask questions. Rachel had come to her nonprofit 5 years ago, said she wanted to donate to a family in need privately, quietly, said she was a single mom under pressure, that the baby deserved more. She paid for everything up front, no formal adoption, just private guardianship. She treated it like a transaction. Danielle said, "But Mason, he was never that to us. He's our son, full stop." I swallowed hard. Does he know? She hesitated. He knows he's adopted. He doesn't know by who. Yet. We talked for 2 hours. I told her everything. Not to justify, not to stake claim, just to tell the truth. And at the end, she said, "You deserve to see him. But more than that, he deserves to see you." We agreed to one meeting, supervised, limited time, but real. I didn't sleep the night before. I ironed my best blouse, practiced what I'd say, threw out half of it by morning. We met at a library playroom, bright, quiet, full of paperbacks and sunlit corners. He walked in holding a tiny dinosaur. His curls were longer, his face older, but it was him. "Mason." I smiled.
Hi, I'm Jessica.
He studied me, then nodded, like he already knew. "You're the judge." I laughed. That's what they tell me. He sat beside me, legs swinging under the tiny chair. For the next 45 minutes, we played memory cards, drew silly portraits, talked about dinosaurs and space and why broccoli is evil. It was easy, natural. And when Danielle called time, he said something that will live inside me forever. "Can I see you again?" I looked at Danielle. She nodded. "Yeah, buddy," I whispered. "If it's okay with your mom, I'd love that." Later that night, I got a call from my parents. I hadn't spoken to them since the dinner. My mom's voice was brittle. "Your sister told us you're trying to take her child." I didn't respond to the accusation. Instead, I asked, "Did she ever tell you she gave him away?" Silence. Then, softly, my dad said, "No." Another crack in the pedestal. I didn't need their apology. I wasn't calling to win them back. But it felt like the first time they saw me clearly. Like finally, the golden haze around Rachel had lifted. But, of course, Rachel wasn't done. The next morning, a video hit social media. Rachel, in full makeup, crying on camera, talking about betrayal, family vultures, and how someone was trying to rip apart her motherhood journey. It went viral. Thousands of likes, comments full of support, people attacking me without knowing my name. And pinned at the top, a GoFundMe link titled, "Help Me Fight for My Son." It had already raised $12,000. And just like that, the court of public opinion slammed its gavel. Rachel had declared war again. But this time, I wasn't fighting for attention. I was fighting for truth. And I had more than just my word. I had Marcus. I had Beth. And I had a legal surprise Rachel didn't see coming. Because tucked inside that GoFundMe page was a major violation. A lie, a provable one. And with it came leverage. The video was slick. Rachel knew what she was doing. Framed just right. Golden hour lighting, teary-eyed but perfectly contoured. A soft piano track hummed beneath her voice like a eulogy for trust. She spoke about family betrayal, how she made mistakes, but never gave up on her child. She painted herself as the victim of a cruel sister and an ungrateful ex. And the world, predictably, swallowed it whole. The comments were brutal. "Your sister sounds toxic. No mother deserves this. We stand with you, Rachel." It would have been laughable if it wasn't so dangerous. Because buried in the crocodile tears and faux humility was a claim that crossed a legal line.
She said she'd never relinquished custody.
A bold-faced lie. And that, my friends, is where Rachel made her biggest mistake. Because that statement streamed publicly to thousands directly contradicted the notarized guardianship contract with Danielle, a document she signed herself, a document I had a certified copy of. And once you lie in public about legal status, you open yourself up.
Not just morally, legally. I called my attorney friend, Craig, the one who helped file the visitation request. He listened to the video twice, then let out a low whistle.
She's cooked. We drafted a formal cease and desist, this one with real teeth. We included a copy of the guardianship paperwork, quoted family law statutes about false representation of parental rights, reminded her that soliciting funds under a knowingly false claim was not just unethical, it bordered on fraud.
Then we sent it to Rachel's lawyer, her PR manager, and her sponsors.
Within 48 hours, the GoFundMe was frozen. Her Instagram went on private. Her PR rep dropped her due to misalignment of values. That wasn't revenge. That was justice warming up. But I wasn't done. Beth called me that night. Voice low.
She's unraveling. Jess, her assistant just quit. She's spiraling.
I believed it. Rachel's life had always been curated chaos. As long as she controlled the narrative, she stayed afloat. But now, the seams were splitting, and the audience she built with filters and victimhood, they were watching the real story break through. 2 days later, I got a letter.
Not from Rachel, from her lawyer.
It wasn't a threat this time. It was a request. Rachel wanted to meet. In private. No attorneys. 1 hour. I hesitated. Beth said, "You don't owe her that." Marcus said, "Be careful. She manipulates." But part of me needed it. Not for her, but for me. So we met. Neutral ground again. A quiet boardroom at Beth's clinic. After hours. No phones. No audience. Rachel walked in looking small. No makeup, no designer bag, just jeans and a hoodie 2 sizes too big. She sat across from me. Didn't speak at first. Finally, she said, "You win."
I waited.
She swallowed. "Mason asks about you." I didn't think he remembered, but he does. I stayed silent. I didn't know what to do with him. Jess, I panicked. I thought I could just pass it off, pretend it didn't happen. But you made it real. I looked her in the eye. He is real. He's not a mistake. He's not a secret. He's a person, a child. Her lips trembled. I see that now. That would have meant something years ago, but now it was too late. She reached into her bag, pulled out an envelope. "This is a formal statement," she said. "I'm relinquishing any residual rights. Danielle's adopting him fully. I'm walking away." I didn't take it right away. I studied her. "Why now?" She didn't blink. "Because I lost everything trying to pretend I had it all." The words landed heavy, not dramatic, just true. I took the envelope. She stood to leave. But at the door, she paused. "For what it's worth, I never hated you. I just hated how much they loved you when you didn't even try." I could have said 100 things, but I didn't. Because sometimes silence is the loudest truth. The next morning, I sat with Danielle and Mason on her porch. He brought me a lopsided drawing of a tree with 3 stick figures beneath it. "That's you," he said, pointing. "That's me, and that's Mommy D." I bit my lip to keep from crying. Danielle smiled. "You're part of his forest now." Later that day, I got a call from my father. He sounded older, tired. "Your mother and I, we watched the video, and then we saw what came after." He paused. "We failed you. We let Rachel's version of things blind us. We're sorry."
My hand gripped the phone tighter. Not for anger, not for closure, for relief. Because that apology, it was 30 years overdue. But it still mattered. I stood at my window that night, watching the city lights blink like Morse code. It wasn't over. Not yet. There were still whispers in the community, rumors. Rachel would always find some way to spin things. But now I had something she never did. Peace. And then, an email. From a name I didn't recognize. Subject line, Rachel's custody past press inquiry. I clicked it open. Inside, a journalist, asking questions, saying they were preparing a feature, and they wanted to speak with me. Attached. A screenshot. Rachel was shopping a memoir. Tentative title, The Sister Who Stole My Child. I stared at the subject line for a long time. The Sister Who Stole My Child. Even for Rachel, that was bold. A memoir. After everything. After the video fell apart. After the GoFundMe scandal. After she signed her rights away. But of course, she couldn't help herself. If she couldn't own the truth, she'd rewrite it. I called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. You saw it, I asked. The email, he said. Yeah, she pitched it to 3 major publishers. One bit. I felt my stomach twist. Is it legal? He sighed. Technically, sure. It's memoir. As long as she doesn't name you directly or fabricate too blatantly, she can frame the story how she wants. He paused. But it's also reckless. And the timing's telling. She's not doing this to process. She's doing it to punish. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Let her publish it, I said quietly. Let her scream into the void. I'm done trying to silence echoes. That didn't mean I was walking away. It meant I was choosing my own stage. I agreed to speak with the journalist. We met at a local coffee house. Same one where Danielle and I had our first real talk. Full circle. The journalist Grace was sharp but respectful. No tabloid energy. No clickbait hunger. Just someone who'd seen too many stories get twisted and wanted to hear one from the center. I told her everything, start to finish. The late-night handoffs, the empty nursery, the court documents, the dinner implosion. But more than anything, I told her about Mason. How he laughed with his whole body. How he whispered dinosaurs don't lie when I told him stories. How he drew that first tree with 3 little stick figures and made space for me in his world without even knowing what I'd lost. Grace asked me why I was willing to go public now, after so long. I didn't hesitate. Because the truth deserves to breathe, too. A month later, the article dropped. Not flashy, no scandalized headline, just a simple title. Judge, Sister, Ghost, A Woman's Fight to Be Seen. It went viral for the right reasons. People resonated, not because they knew Rachel's name, but because they'd lived it. Families that fractured under performance, sisters who were scapegoated, children passed like burdens and called blessings. It wasn't revenge. It was reckoning. Rachel's memoir still hit shelves. But it didn't land. The pre-orders tanked. The publisher quietly scaled back marketing. Too many readers had already seen my side, and it rang with something she couldn't manufacture. Truth. And then something unexpected happened. A letter arrived in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. Inside a note in neat, familiar script. Jess. I read the article. I wish I could hate you for it, but I can't. You told the truth. I'm sorry I didn't. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say it finally without an audience. Rachel. No signature flourish, no branding, just those words. I folded it once, then tucked it into the same box where I'd kept Mason's hospital bracelet. Not because I needed the apology, but because some stories don't end with fireworks. Some end with a whisper, and that's enough. Beth, ever the therapist.
once told me, "Closure doesn't always look like winning. Sometimes it looks like walking away without needing to explain why you stayed so long."
I think about that when I tuck Mason in on weekends.
When he calls me Jessie J like I'm a cartoon hero. When we bake ugly muffins and spill sprinkles everywhere. When he falls asleep mid-sentence. Crayon still in hand. He's not mine in the legal sense.
But love doesn't care about paperwork.
He remembers I showed up. He knows I stayed. That's what counts. The chair in my kitchen, the one that used to sit empty, is filled now. With drawings. With crumbs. With laughter. With a second chance I never thought I'd get. So what's the lesson? Maybe it's this. Family isn't built by blood or branding or what strangers believe about your story. It's built in the quiet spaces, the hard decisions, the nights you don't sleep because someone else's pain keeps you awake. It's built by showing up, over and over, even when they tell you not to, even when they say you lost. Because maybe the real revenge isn't destruction. Maybe it's peace. And maybe, just maybe, that's the ending we deserve. If you've watched this far, thank you, really. These stories aren't easy, but they're real. And if mine gave you clarity, comfort, or just something to hold on to, drop a comment, share it with someone still untangling their family threads.
And hit subscribe because stories like this,
They're not rare. They're just rarely told.